On May 18, 2026, Toshifumi Suzuki died at home in Tokyo. He was 93. Seven & I Holdings, the Japanese conglomerate he spent his life building, announced his death 1 week later. The statement thanked people for their kindness. It did not linger. Most of the world's obituaries called him the founder of Japan's convenience store culture, a visionary, the man who built 7-Eleven into a global empire. All of that is true. What the obituaries left out is the part that makes the story worth telling. Go back 10 years, April 7th, 2016. An 83-year-old man walks into a board meeting in Tokyo. He controls one of Japan's largest corporations, 7 & I Holdings, worth roughly $44 billion. He has run this organization, in one form or another, for over 4 decades. He wants to remove a rival executive. He puts the motion to the board. 7 directors vote for his proposal, 6 vote against, 2 cast blank ballots. He needs 8 votes to win. He has 7. Hours after the meeting adjourns, he calls a press conference. "It is my lack of virtue," he tells reporters, "and I am unbearably ashamed." Then he resigns. The man who had quietly turned a borrowed American brand into Japan's most dominant retail institution, and in doing so purchased that American brand outright, had just been stopped by 1 vote. Not ousted by a hostile outsider, not fired by a successor, stopped by the governance system he himself had spent decades building. This is that story. To understand what happened in 2016, you have to go back to 1973. 7-Eleven was born in Dallas, Texas in 1927, a chain of ice docks that started selling milk and bread on the side. By the post-war era, it had evolved into a national convenience store chain, rebranded around its operating hours, open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week. By the early 1970s, it had over 4,000 locations across the United States. In 1973, the parent company, Southland Corporation, made a decision that would eventually cost them everything they owned. They signed a licensing deal with a Japanese retail group called Ito-Yokado. On the American side, it looked like easy money. A foreign company pays to use your brand in a market you're not entering anyway. They follow your standards, you collect royalties. Simple. Ito-Yokado put a relatively young manager in charge of the entire project. His name was Toshifumi Suzuki. Suzuki had no background in convenience retail. He had studied economics at Chuo University, then spent his early career at a publishing company before joining Ito-Yokado in 1963. But he had something more useful than experience, an obsession with systems, a deep distrust of intuition, and a belief that retail, properly engineered, could become something closer to urban infrastructure than a shop. He was 41 years old when he took the job. The first Japanese 7-Eleven opened on May 15, 1974, in the Toyosu district of Tokyo, run by a 24-year-old former liquor store owner who had converted his family shop into a franchised outlet. Within 7 years, there were over 1,000 locations. What made Japanese 7-Eleven different wasn't the branding. It wasn't even the food, though the food became famous. It was the operating system underneath. Suzuki introduced something the convenience store world had never seen: a data-driven supply chain that treated time as an inventory variable. Stores didn't just restock shelves, they rotated products by the hour. Breakfast items in the morning, bento boxes at noon, hot comfort food at night. In some locations, the same shelf held entirely different products 3 times a day. The logistics ran on a principle that seems obvious only in hindsight. Japanese rice goes stale when refrigerated, as chilling hardens its starches. So rather than freeze products and sacrifice quality, Suzuki's engineers designed an entirely different system, one that maintained a precise 20 degrees Celsius temperature across the entire supply chain, from factory floor to delivery truck to store shelf, and delivered fresh food to each location multiple times a day. This was not a small operational tweak. It required distribution centers close enough to allow short routes, fast turnaround, and continuous feedback. What sold in the morning shaped what was ordered for the afternoon. The system learned constantly. Suzuki also pioneered what he called an area dominance strategy, deliberately clustering stores within tight geographic zones rather than spreading thinly across the country. A single delivery truck could loop through a dozen outlets in one run. Brand recognition compounded. Data across neighboring stores fed each other. And from October 1987, Suzuki began turning 7-Eleven stores into something else entirely: local government infrastructure. That month, 7-Eleven Japan allowed customers to pay their Tokyo Electric power bills inside the store. Tokyo Gas followed in 1988. Long before smartphones, before digital payments, millions of Japanese citizens who didn't want a sandwich were walking through 7-Eleven's doors every month just to pay their utilities. The foot traffic baseline it created was something no traditional retailer could manufacture. By the mid-1980s, Japanese 7-Eleven wasn't just outperforming its competitors, it was outperforming the original American chain on almost every metric that mattered: sales per store, gross margin, customer frequency. Suzuki had taken a borrowed American concept and rebuilt it from the ground up for Japan's geography, culture, and infrastructure needs, and in doing so, built something better than the original. Meanwhile, in the United States, Southland Corporation was collapsing. In 1987, the founding Thompson family had taken the company private in a defensive leveraged buyout worth nearly $5 billion, designed to fend off a hostile raid by Canadian investor Samuel Bellsberg. The debt load was enormous, and when oil prices fell and consumer spending tightened, the business couldn't service it. On October 24, 1990, after defaulting on $1.8 billion in publicly traded debt, Southland filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company that had sold Japan the right to use its brand 3 years earlier was now asking Japan for help. Ito Yokado and 7-Eleven Japan stepped in as part of the restructuring, a $430 million cash infusion in exchange for 70% of Southland's common stock. The American parent emerged from bankruptcy in March 1991. The Japanese side now controlled it. In 2005, they acquired the remaining shares in a tender offer: full ownership. The licensee had become the owner. The student had absorbed the teacher. That year, Ito Yokado reorganized itself into a holding company called 7&I Holdings, with 7-Eleven Japan as its crown jewel. Toshifumi Suzuki became chairman and CEO of the entire group. He was 73 years old. Here is where the story gets complicated. Suzuki's management style was, by most accounts, deeply centralized. He made decisions quickly and expected them to be executed without debate. Former executives describe a culture where disagreement, even on operational details, carried real professional risk. That worked when the company was growing. It created problems when the environment changed. By the early 2000s, 7&I was under pressure from multiple directions. E-commerce was accelerating in Japan. Ito Yokado supermarkets, the group's legacy business, were losing ground. Investors were asking why a holding company with a dominant convenience store operation was also propping up underperforming department stores. Activist shareholders began circling. The most vocal was Daniel Loeb, the billionaire founder of New York hedge fund Third Point LLC, which had taken a stake in 7&I. On March 28, 2016, just 10 days before the board meeting, Loeb sent an open letter to the company warning explicitly against letting family ties determine the next CEO. The concern was specific. Suzuki was 83 and in deteriorating health. Investors feared he was maneuvering to install his son, Yasuhiro, then serving as 7&I's chief information officer, as his eventual successor. Suzuki denied it. He had never uttered any such things, he said publicly. The board wasn't convinced. In April 2016, Suzuki moved to remove Ryuichi Isaka, the president of 7-Eleven Japan, and the man Loeb and Third Point had explicitly backed as the preferred successor. The motion went to the board. 7 directors voted for Suzuki's proposal. 6 voted against. 2 cast blank ballots. He needed 8. He had 7. In Japanese corporate culture, a board returning that kind of split against a sitting chairman's explicit proposal is not a partial defeat. It is, in effect, a signal that absolute authority is gone. Suzuki understood immediately. He resigned at a press conference that afternoon. "It is my lack of virtue, and I am unbearably ashamed," he told reporters. "I was supposed to attend an analyst meeting tomorrow, but I cannot go there and explain this year's prospects anymore after I decided to quit." When asked about the vote breakdown, he said, "I don't care about the breakdown of the votes. I consider I have lost the confidence of the board when no votes were cast by inside directors." Ryuichi Isaka was appointed president of 7&i Holdings the following month. He would go on to run the company for nearly a decade. Suzuki had spent decades building a governance architecture: professional boards, independent directors, institutional investor access, designed to make 7&i a modern, internationally credible corporation. And it was precisely that architecture, functioning exactly as designed, that removed him. He was not ousted by a hostile outsider. He was stopped by the system he built. Toshifumi Suzuki's story is unusual enough to be interesting on its own, but it points to something that comes up repeatedly in business history and almost never gets named clearly. The skills that build an institution are often different from the skills required to sustain it once it's built. Suzuki was exceptional at creating systems, supply chains, franchise structures, data infrastructure, governance frameworks. Each of those systems made 7&i more robust, more scalable, more durable. But systems, once they become large and complex enough, develop their own logic. They respond to incentives the original architect didn't intend and sometimes can't control. The board that voted against Suzuki wasn't acting irrationally. It was responding to real pressure from shareholders who had a legitimate claim on the company's direction. Loeb wasn't wrong that the succession question mattered. The governance process that produced the 7-6 split was the same governance process Suzuki had championed as a marker of corporate maturity. He built the instrument, someone else played it. There's also a simpler version of this story, about what happens when a founder stays too long. Suzuki was 83. He had been running some version of this organization for over 40 years. The conviction that made him effective, the certainty that he understood the business better than anyone, had by then become indistinguishable from rigidity. After he left, the company he built faced pressures he never had to navigate. In July 2024, Canada's Alimentation Couche-Tard, the operator of Circle K, launched a bid to acquire 7&i Holdings for $46 billion. It would have been the largest foreign buyout of a Japanese corporation in history. 7&i fought it off. In November 2024, the founding Ito family proposed a competing $58 billion management buyout to keep the company in Japanese hands. That attempt collapsed in February 2025 when financing couldn't be secured. In May 2025, 7&i appointed Stephen Dacus as its new CEO, the company's first foreign chief executive. In July 2025, Couche-Tard formally withdrew its bid, accusing 7&i of a calculated campaign of obfuscation and delay. 7&i denied it. In September 2025, Ito Yokado, the original supermarket group that had brought 7-Eleven to Japan in 1973, the company Suzuki had joined as a young man in 1963, was sold to U.S. private equity firm Bain Capital. The founding business is gone. The American brand that Suzuki licensed, then outperformed, then purchased, is now led by a foreign CEO and was nearly sold to a Canadian company for $46 billion. The man who engineered all of it died quietly at home on May 18, 2026, with none of that resolved. 7&i Holdings announced his passing 1 week later. Whether that's a tragedy or just business depends on how you measure what a life's work is worth.